Remasters in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise have been a touchy subject, especially in the last few years. Sonic Jam had the original Genesis trilogy remade from the ground up on the Saturn. Sonic Adventure DX and Sonic Adventure 2 Battle were essentially ports with updated content that brought their own share of problems. Sonic Genesis was the equivalent of beating the first game with a baseball bat and spitting on the remains. Sonic Colors Ultimate was a complete disaster on launch, and Sonic Origins suffered from misleading marketing and a few other minor issues. It's been very hit or miss to say the least. And I think many were a bit nervous with the announcement of Sonic X Shadow Generations, myself included. Sonic Generations is my favorite Sonic game of all time, and if anything were to happen to it, I would not hesitate to destroy the planet.
But you couldn't deny that the package of Sonic X Shadow Generations did look intriguing. A full Generations remaster with content entirely focused on Shadow the Hedgehog? Alright, I'll bite. And from there on out, Shadow Generations was just surprising me with how much confidence the game was radiating during its marketing campaign. This felt like a product that Sonic Team genuinely had faith in, and they wanted to show it off proudly. I was also pleasantly surprised to see how much side material they were releasing along with the game. There was a manga released in Japan focusing on Shadow, and not gonna lie, this was one of the most fucked up panels I've ever seen. It's become a tradition for every major Sonic release to have an animated production alongside it, and I have to say that Sonic X Shadow Generations Dark Beginnings may be the best out of all of them in terms of presentation and storytelling.
Now here comes the dilemma. Which one do we start with? At the end of the day, this package is Sonic X Shadow Generations, but Shadow has all the new content. Let's just start with base Generations because it lays the groundwork for what the new content will do. I'm not gonna bother with spoilers for the original Generations, and if you haven't seen anything with the game in the last 13 years, I don't know what to tell you. So, let's jump to the remaster version of Sonic Generations.
It's a peaceful day in this Green Hill area. That's Green Hill, all lowercase, by the way. Sonic's friends are holding a surprise birthday party for the Blue Blur, which is suddenly interrupted by this giant monster, who sucks up all the crew in these time portals. Sonic wakes up in this mysterious white space and soon finds himself running through Green Hill Zone again, and that's capital Green Hill Zone. Once he meets up with Tails again, the two begin to explore more of this area, leading both of them to both the chemical plant in Westside Island and the Sky Sanctuary on Angel Island. Soon, Sonic explores this mirror hall and discovers that his past self, dubbed Classic Sonic by the game, has also been running around in this time-space void. When they all meet up, they surmise that they're traveling through time and space and decide to search for the monster that brought them here while looking for more of their lost friends. As they journey through this white space, they find Dr. Eggman lurking around before he's ultimately kidnapped by the creature as well. Once they collect the Chaos Emeralds that have ended up here, the group encounters the monster only to discover that it was being controlled by Dr. Eggman the entire time, along with the past Dr. Robotnik. After the events of Sonic Colors, Eggman found this baby form of the Time Eater and discovered its time manipulation abilities and decided to perfect the creature and conquer all of time and space. In order to do so, he needed some help, so he enlisted the help of Eggman from the past in order to get the job done. But the Sonics aren't having any of that shit and transform into the Super Sonics to get the credits rolling. Everyone is warped back to the birthday party with Classic Sonic and Classic Tails returning to their original timeline, ending Sonic Generations. If it seems like I'm skipping over large portions of the story, I'm not. Sonic Generations has one of the most underplayed plots in a Sonic game, and considering the game's premise, it's kind of baffling. You get hints of a larger narrative here and there, but nothing ever comes of it. Sonic and Tails only make comments about Green Hill and Chemical Plant at the beginning of the game, and that's it. It could have been so fun to see the group comment about locations like City Escape, Rooftop Run, especially Crisis City, but alas, nothing is said. Also, notice I didn't mention Classic Tails until the end of the summary because the kid shows up out of nowhere with no proper introduction. It's weird that this game had less of a story compared to Sonic Colors, and I understand they wanted to reel back a bit on bigger narratives after the late 2000s, but wouldn't you want to go a bit more in-depth with the game celebrating the franchise's 20th anniversary? Generations also received a rewrite of all the game's cutscene dialogue, written by Ian Flynn for this remaster, and it's technically better. The dialogue itself is fine, but they didn't resync the lip movements to match the new lines, and at times it looked hokey as shit.
I'm sorry. I didn't get that memo. I beat you every time. No, seriously. We beat this guy every time. It's like it's our job or something. Oh, please, keep dreaming, Egghead. I beat you every time. No, seriously. We beat him every time. Our scorecard's flawless.
The dialogue doesn't really do much to improve the narrative as a whole, but it at least fixes the characterization a bit. It's not as overly referential as Flynn's writing was at times in Sonic Frontiers, but it at least gets the job done. Parts of the cutscenes were also reanimated as well. For example, instead of Sonic pushing Amy's face away in this opening shot, she's holding cupcakes and looking all adorable. Instead of Amy knocking Knuckles into a tree, he just staggers a bit. And they gave Silver a chili dog. Oh god, Silver, your hand! Are these the true powers of a telepath? Easy on the grip, bro. No one's taking that from you.
So the story is nothing to write home about, but I'd be lying if I said I played Sonic games for the story. It's the gameplay that's most important. In Sonic Generations, it delivers.
Sonic Generations is split into two parts. In Act 1, you take control of classic Sonic, emulating the gameplay style of the original Genesis games. The feel isn't one-to-one like the original trilogy, but I'd still say it's more than acceptable. He speeds up at a good pace and does go faster or slower depending on the terrain. The only thing I'm bummed out by is that the rolling can't be used to gain speed on slopes. That was one of my favorite things to do in the older games, but here it just peters out after 5 feet. But thankfully the spin dash makes up for it. This is by far the most powerful spin dash in the entire series. You launch like a damn bottle rocket with it, and I love using it off slopes and platforms to reach higher areas. And of course, like the older games, there are monitors around that can give rings, speed shoes, invincibility, and extra lives, but no shields though. More on that later. For Act 2, you play as modern Sonic using the boost formula from Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Colors, which means drifting around tight corners, quick stepping around obstacles, homing attacks, sliding and stomping, and of course, the boost. At a slower pace, modern Sonic's turning can be a bit stiff, but the level design tailors to both high speed and slower pace movement. When you launch off of specific dash ramps or rainbow rings, you can flick the analog stick to do tricks that'll extend your boost gauge a bit. I always try to see how many I can do before finishing the combo, but part of me always wished you faceplant into the floor if you didn't finish your combo in time. The boost formula of this time had Sonic swap between both 2D and 3D segments, but unlike in Sonic Unleashed, where a majority of the 3D sections were just boosting and quick stepping, modern Sonic's levels have a lot more 3D platforming sections sprinkled throughout, and reward the player for knowing when and when not to boost. This is further exemplified by the game's wonderful level design. There are so many different alternate pathways to reach the end of the level, and the philosophy is similar to that of the Genesis titles, where the higher pathways lead you to both faster times and goodies. One of my favorite bits is in Act 2 of Chemical Plant. You can head down this middle pipeline like normal, but you can also jump to either of the two curving pipes to the side for a different path. And each level has design like this all over the game. I will say that even though the switching between 2D and 3D thing with modern Sonic was great for games like Unleashed, with classic Sonic as only 2D in this game, it makes the 2D parts of modern Sonic's levels seem unnecessary. They're still good, but was it too much to make all of modern Sonic's levels completely 3D? Speaking of the levels, there are 3 different eras with 3 levels apiece, and they're all levels from previous Sonic games. In the Genesis era, there's Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1, Chemical Plant Zone from Sonic 2, and Sky Sanctuary from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I still remember a time where it was so exciting to see these levels come back, but now whenever they show up, it just feels like the equivalent of Takashi Iizuka jump scaring you and tasing you in the nuts. Granted, that's more the fault of Sonic Team for constantly bringing these locations back, but still. The Dreamcast era, we have Speed Highway from Sonic Adventure, City Escape from Sonic Adventure 2, and Seaside Hill from Sonic Heroes. Finally, for the modern era, there's Crisis City from Sonic 06, Rooftop Run from Sonic Unleashed, and Planet Wisp from Sonic Colors. All good level picks, but I do have my critiques. I think there are maybe 1 or 2 many city levels in the roster. I personally would have swapped Speed Highway for Emerald Coast, but that's just me. Despite how much I love Seaside Hill, it does feel a bit redundant since Green Hill is in the same game, and Planet Wisp is kind of a weak final level. I would have preferred something like Asteroid Coaster. These levels aren't just cosmetic though. Most of the obstacles and big moments from the previous games are brought back in full force, but some are reworked to really help the levels stand out on their own. For example, Sky Sanctuary still has the crumbling platforms and spiral structures, but for modern Sonic, the place is constantly falling apart the more you traverse, and you get to explore more of the indoor garden buildings. City Escape still has Sonic being chased by the gun truck, but in classic Sonic's level, this fucking thing will not stop chasing you, and the level design rewards you for staying ahead of the truck. Modern Sonic's gun truck has giant saw blades and rocket boosters on it, and now I'm convinced it's Jim Carrey's Eggman behind the wheel. Not all of it strikes gold though. I could have gone without using the Spike and Rocket Wisp and Planet Wisp over and over again. The Wisps in Sonic Colors were pretty much optional and allowed you to gain more points or get to a higher route. In Sonic Generations Planet Wisp, you have to use them to make progress, and that's just kinda sucky. Pink Spikes just brings the stage's pacing to a halt with these gears that you have to spin dash into. And while it's not entirely the same with the Orange Rocket, you have to use it over and over and over and over, and I got sick of it by use number 2. In between stages, you can take on these challenge gates that have a condition that Sonic needs to complete in order to finish the stage. Like this level, where you can't refill your boost meter, but it's 3 times the size. Or in the many missions that involve Sonic getting assistance from one of his friends. Some of these are great fun, like one of my all-time favorites is the snowboarding one through Rooftop Run. Others are either on an alright level, or they just suck balls. This spinner mission with Amy and Sky Sanctuary is a pain because the spinner controls like garbage. Any mission that has to do with the stupid sprinkler enemy can go fuck itself, and the less I say about the blue mission in classic Rooftop Run, the better. Completing these challenges nets you keys needed in order to fight bosses to advance to the next area, and defeating both rival battles and boss battles would net you a Chaos Emerald. For the rival battles, we have Metal Sonic, Shadow, and Silver. Metal Sonic is a more entertaining fight than the race in Sonic CD, but it ends up being a bit too easy. Shadow's fight is awesome. You race through the arc collecting energy orbs before him to unleash his super attack. Silver is by far the best one. Not only is this boss fight way better than his introduction to the series, but this motherfucker is out for blood. For the boss battles, there's the Death Egg Robot from Sonic 2, Perfect Chaos from Sonic Adventure, and the Egg Dragoon from Sonic Unleashed. The Death Egg sort of falls into the same bubble that Metal Sonic is in, but I do like setting up the robot to hit these bombs in Phase 2. Perfect Chaos is more like a level than an actual fight, and I think that really helps it stand out. Depth perception can be a bit tricky in the second phase though. The Egg Dragoon is so fast-paced and action-packed, but I do think it can last a bit too long if you don't take him out in time. The Time Eater can suck my flaccid. This may be the worst final boss in the entire franchise. For a majority of the fight, you're just boosting towards it, and there will be times where you swear you've hit the damn thing, and then it just jumps back for no reason. Then you gotta ram your face into it again in order for the hit to register. And I swear this is one of the glitchiest final bosses I've ever experienced. It sucks that the game ends on this low point, but the rest of the game more than makes up for it. Red rings return from Sonic Colors, and instead of collecting them all to unlock Super Sonic, each individual ring will unlock either concept art or a music piece you can play over a level and boss theme in the main stage. As shit as the final boss is, there's just something that fills my heart with joy whenever I play what I'm made of during the fight. You could also unlock skills to use in the levels that can tweak Sonic's abilities and give him power-ups to use. This is how Classic Sonic gets access to his shield, specifically like the regular shield, Aqua Shield, Lightning Shield, and Flame Shield, all of them working just like they did in Sonic 3. It is weird not getting them from monitors, but I like having access to shields whenever I'd like. Modern Sonic also has his fair share of cool skills like Blast Off and a skill that can double your boost meter or increase your trick speed. Once you beat the final boss, you can also unlock the Super Sonic skill, and good lord what happened here. Classic Super Sonic just feels like an invincibility power-up with an extra height and no increased speed. And Modern Sonic has these sections where when he boosts, he just flies through the stage and it consumes like 10 rings a second. Also, when you use the Supersonic skill, your rings drain by 2 rings a second instead of 1 ring a second like in the final boss. Why is there no consistency here? I mentioned earlier that the remaster tweaked the cutscenes a bit, but that wasn't the only thing that was changed. First of all, the game is now running natively at 1080p 60 frames a second, and it looks gorgeous. I know most people will think it's not that big of a deal since we've had a PC version since 2011, but I don't remember it running this smoothly. I don't know if I'm crazy or not, but it does look like they've tweaked the lighting in some places as well, but not enough to take away from the stage's original intentions with its look. But that's not all, they've also added the drop dash! Alright, hold on, hear me out. So Modern Sonic has access to the drop dash just like he did in Sonic Frontiers. That's good. I honestly haven't found too much use for it in 3D sections, but there are a few parts in 2D that I've been able to make work with it. Classic Sonic also has the drop dash, and while it's not as strong as the spin dash, it's still nice to use it to keep the pace going. When I went around the hub world with Classic Sonic, I got really confused as to why Classic Sonic couldn't drop dash anymore, but Modern Sonic could do it just fine. It took me until I went into the skills menu when I found out that the game gave Classic Sonic the drop dash as a new skill that's equipped at the start, which the game does not tell you about for some reason, and since it's a skill, you can't use it in challenges or boss fights. See, now this reaction makes sense, doesn't it? Why give it to Classic Sonic as a skill, but then hardcode it into Modern Sonic's moveset? Either make both a skill or not, you can't just have your birthday chili dogs and eat it too. The remaster also added these 3 hidden chow in each of the levels that, as far as I'm aware, it only gives you an achievement when you collect all of them, which is fine, I guess? But I will admit they are really cute, and they hang out around the stage entrances doing these little guy things, so yeah, they get a pass from me. The game already looked gorgeous on original hardware back in 2011, but with the increase to 1080p and the smooth 60 frames per second, the game's never looked or felt better. The music is still as great as it was back in 2011, with wonderful remixes and rearrangements of some of Sonic's best throughout the series, with my favorite ones being both acts of City Escape and Crisis City. And despite how ass the final boss is, I do love Modern Sonic's version of the Time Eater theme. 13 years later, and Sonic Generations is still one hell of a Sonic game. The levels are some of the best Modern Sonic has to offer, the game is graphically and auditorily gorgeous, and despite the premise being a celebration of the series' history, I think this is a Sonic game that anyone could pick up and play. I may have a few minor gripes with some things that were added in this remastered version, but they're not big enough issues to prevent me from giving it a seal of approval. Sonic Generations has stood the test of time as my favorite Sonic game in the franchise, but I have a feeling that the other game included in this bundle may end up taking that spot very soon.
Now here's the content you were all really looking forward to, and I'm going to put up a big Spoiler warning right now, if you have not beaten Shadow Generations, stop watching this video and go play it right now. This is technically the latest game in the franchise, and I am going to go a bit in depth with it, and I don't want to rob you of the moments of joy you'll have experiencing it for the first time. So let's shift gears and begin talking about the second game included in this bundle, Shadow Generations.
If you're a newer Sonic fan that's not as familiar with Shadow's past, the game has a nice mini cutscene at the beginning summarizing all of Shadow's history up until now, so don't feel like you have to play all the other games beforehand in order to understand what's going on. Upon having nightmares after being in view of the Space Colony Ark, continuity! Shadow begins to investigate the Ark and suspicions of the Black Arm's return. When Shadow finds a section of the Ark all distorted, he discovers that Black Doom has indeed returned and shows Shadow his power by taking him to Radical Highway. Alright. As Shadow continues his hunt for Black Doom, he discovers the fake Chaos Emerald that Tails made in Sonic Adventure 2, but before he can say anything more on the matter, the Time Eater shows up and does his little dance, transporting Shadow into his own section of white space. As he continues his search, he notices that through some strange new mutations, he's unlocking new abilities that seem all too natural to him. Every time he encounters Black Doom, he keeps things very cryptic, telling Shadow he'll battle when they're both ready, whatever that means. Well, after quite a number of trips down memory lane, Shadow eventually discovers that Maria and Gerald Robotnik were transported to white space as well, taken from a time before the Ark incident. He begins to wonder if it's possible to change their fate, but focuses on the main threat for the time being. Shadow soon begins to notice that his new abilities give off the same energy as the black moon that's hanging in the sky. Jared reveals to Shadow and Maria the deal that he made with Black Doom that led to Shadow's creation. Black Doom wanted a perfect warrior, and since they're connected by blood, he grows in power as Shadow does. Black Doom plans to either take control of Shadow's mind like he did briefly in their last encounter, or take over Shadow's body to be fully reborn through him. But Shadow promises to use his new abilities to take Black Doom down. Through exploring more of white space, he runs into Sonic, and the two have their fight, with Sonic ending up with his Chaos Emerald. However, he managed to get the fake Chaos Emerald, and Shadow tells Rouge to swap them out when his work is done. Shadow gathers the last of his new abilities and has one last battle with Black Doom, once again emerging the victor. He gives the Emerald to Rouge and says his final and heartbreaking goodbyes to Gerald and Maria, before heading off with Rouge to support Sonic in his fight with the Time Eater, ending the story of Shadow Generations. The base outline of the story isn't anything too spectacular, but what makes up for it is some of the best character writing the series has ever had. For the longest time, it felt like they had no idea what they wanted to do with Shadow's character, and now it finally seems like he's back on track. And it was nice seeing him get the chance to have some closure with Maria and Gerald. I know many players might seem a bit confused considering that Shadow claimed to be putting his past behind him, but grief doesn't always work like that. They make Shadow's conflict in seeing his family again feel real. Shadow also runs into a few other characters like Omega, Orbot, Cubot, and Big, but they don't really have any impact on the story aside from some dialogue and a side quest, but their inclusions are welcome regardless. Big says something along the lines of getting to meet Princess Elise because Froggy ran into the palace, and I think that's really funny. And this is the kind of world building I really want to see from the games. Dialogue that makes it feel like these places these characters have been to aren't just forgotten and abandoned. I don't want them to be one and done. We don't have to go back to them every single game, but acknowledging that they're still here makes the world feel a little bit bigger to me. I do love how Omega believes that since the Black Arm's weapons are bioorganic, that Shadow should be able to turn his hand into a gun.
I call dibs.
No notes for Omega, he's already perfect. Cutscene direction is also miles above that which we saw in Sonic Frontiers. I honestly can't think of any cutscene I thought looked bad. Character animation is very nice and doesn't feel stiff or awkward like the previous titles. The voice acting is great across the board, with the exception of Rouge. I don't know if they can't find a good direction for her or if her actress is just not getting it, but Rouge genuinely sounds awful in this game.
Are you still aboard the Ark?
Now he has the Chaos Emerald. Whatever.
The star of the show is Kirk Thornton as Shadow. His performance in this game has made me come around on his voice for the character. He did such a fantastic job. I also enjoy Stephanie Shea's performance as Maria. She knocks it out of the park.
Now, the story may not seem like the most in-depth thing you've ever seen, but it does mean a lot if you're a longtime Sonic fan. And in my case, I was absolutely ecstatic.
If Sonic Generations was the love letter to the entire Sonic franchise up until 2011, then Shadow Generations is the love letter to the adventure era that the series hasn't given much love to since Sonic Generations. If you grew up during the adventure era of Sonic like I did, then you're going to feel right at home. Shadow Generations takes a very similar approach to Sonic Generations, in which you go through levels from Shadow's history. There's no classic Shadow though, it's just regular Shadow from beginning to end. Shadow's control is probably the best control any character has had in a 3D Sonic game since Sonic Adventure. It feels wickedly smooth. Both acts use the boost formula we're all more than familiar with, but Act 1 is purely in 3D, while Act 2 is purely in 2D. And if you're going to have 2D in a 3D Sonic game, I think this is how you do it. Shadow's base kit should be more than familiar with players, especially if they've played both Sonic Generations and Sonic Frontiers before this. But Shadow isn't just a carbon clone of Sonic, he's got some of his own tools to add to the mix. He has access to his Chaos Spears like he did in Sonic 06, and not only are they a great tool to stun enemies with, but they're actually used to activate some switches in the level design that open up more of the various routes. He also has access to Chaos Control like he did in his 2005 title. You freeze time leaving obstacles frozen in place, and you can find these lightspeed dash energy paths to zoom through the stage. This is probably my favorite aspect of playing as Shadow, figuring out the best place to use Chaos Control to either get to higher routes or finish the stage even faster. You can freeze time to make these ballistic missiles into smaller platforms, or maybe use it to freeze these train enemies before they can destroy the rail to a higher pathway. And Shadow's new Doom powers enhance that sense of experimentation I have with Chaos Control. There's Doom Spears that add a lock-on to your base Chaos Spears, Doom Blast which can launch an enemy up and away to use as footholds to higher areas or as projectiles into enemies and obstacles, Doom Surf that gives Shadow full traversal over water, Doom Morph that gives Shadow the abilities to splatoon his way through this purple gunk, the grapple swing and dash, and the Doom Wings which are essentially Shadow's equivalent to Supersonic. All of these abilities are awesome, though I will say that Doom Morph gave me the most trouble on my first playthrough since I don't think the game does a great job explaining it to the player. These abilities in combination with the level design leads to some of the best levels we've ever had in a 3D Sonic game. Not only does the game have a ton of alternate pathways, but it encourages the player to mess around with all of Shadow's skills in tandem with each other, like using Chaos Control to freeze an enemy in place so you can Doom Blast to a higher area. Levels are also much longer in Shadow Generations, so if you worry that the level peters out before they can truly begin, trust me, they don't. I love all the levels in this game, especially when it comes to speedrunning. There's a trick that you can use with Chaos Spear that'll let you carry your forward momentum when you go flying, and it is one of my favorite parts of playing this game. I think the official term for this is the Chaos Gritty? Don't ask, I didn't come up with it. Like I mentioned earlier, all of Shadow's levels are based off of his history, but they're not really split into eras like in Sonic Generations. We have the Space Colony arc from Sonic Adventure 2, Rail Canyon from Sonic Heroes, Kingdom Valley from Sonic 06, Sunset Heights from Sonic Forces, Chaos Island from Sonic Frontiers, and Radical Highway also from Sonic Adventure 2. The arc is a great starting level. It eases you into all your abilities perfectly and has a nice open area to explore to look for new pathways. Rail Canyon is probably the weakest level in the game, only because it doesn't have anything that is as cool as the other levels, but there's still a lot of fun to be had here. Kingdom Valley is my favorite level in the game. This area is so open, and I've been able to take a different route every time I've played it. Sunset Heights was a surprise inclusion for me, but this game's design philosophy finally does this level the justice it deserved in Sonic Forces. I think it also does the best at remixing its returning elements to make it really stand out. For example, in Act 1, the Death Egg robot chucks this debris at you, but you can use Chaos Control to freeze them in place and use them as footholds to a higher pathway. And in Act 2, they'll actively try to shoot you with lasers and extend their arms towards you, which you can use to Doom Kick to get to a higher area and finish the level faster. More of this, please! I got a feeling that Chaos Island was added purely because they already had the assets on hand, but that doesn't stop it from being a great level, especially thanks to the use of Doom Morph. Radical Highway's acts are both purely 3D levels, and while they're great fun, I was getting a bit tired of the Radical Highway aesthetic by the end of the journey. There are a few levels that have Shadow transported to a hallucinogenic version of Radical Highway, and while these sections are cool, I think it would have helped if these sections had a different aesthetic, like maybe something like Westopolis or Lava Shelter. When you're not going through the levels, you're traversing the open zone in white space, and folks, I need whoever designed this area to come back for whatever open zone Sonic game comes out next. I'll admit that the open zones of Sonic Frontiers didn't feel all too Sonic-like in its aesthetic or design, but these ruin-like areas of Shadow Generations are designed in a way that makes traversal feel seamless and fun to explore. There are treasure chests, time challenges, and bolts scattered around to find, and much like the design in the main levels, you're rewarded for using your abilities in ways that make you think outside the box. Your main gameplay loop is going through the levels to unlock some of your Doom powers, then collecting keys through the challenge gates to take on the boss. There aren't as many challenges as base Sonic Generations, but I find these ones more fun and in some instances more challenging. This hard mode version of the Spike Ball challenge in Sunset Heights was a genuine challenge, and it's not the type of BS hard Sonic games can have at times. For the boss battles, we have the Bio-Lizard from Sonic Adventure 2, Metal Overlord from Sonic Heroes, and the Bio-Lizard starts off traditional like its previous fights, but once the mutations begin to kick in, the fight ramps up things with projectiles and a casual spirit bomb. Yeah, okay. Metal Overlord's fight is constantly on the move with Doom Surf, and you have to knock into debris in the water to do damage to him. and he can actually counteract Chaos Control with his own, so you have to figure out the best place to use it. Mephiles is by far the best boss in the game. You're mainly using Doom Morph to knock him out of his purple liquid and beat the ever-loving fuck out of him. I also love the lore implications from this fight, as he's trying to defeat shadows he can jump ship from the void and restore himself to the timeline. Poor guy just wants to exist, but unfortunately for him, I'm not about to let that happen. Graphically, I think this may take the cake for the most graphically impressive Sonic game. Great lighting, amazing environmental design, good model construction, good textures. This game is pure eye candy to me, and the soundtrack is pure ear candy. Jun Sonoe makes his grand return as main composer for a 3D Sonic game, and him and his fellow collaborators knocked this soundtrack out of the park. The remixes and rearrangements of Bullet Station, Kingdom Valley, Supporting Me, What I'm Made Of, Sunset Heights, and Chaos Islands are all great listens. Especially Chaos Island. The half point of this song makes me feel like I'm in a club. For both Sonic and Shadow Generations, there are also these online ranking boards you can participate in to post your fastest times and compete against others. I didn't get much competition for Sonic Generations, sorry Prankster, but my competition for Shadow Generations was something fierce. Eat a dick, Dad. Straight up. The Digital Deluxe Edition comes with a few bonuses, like a music pack and this sick-looking Terrio skin. I wish there were more skins in the base game, but I'm sure it'll be rectified with DLC, like the Movie Shadow pack coming out December 12th. If you pre-ordered the game, you got an SA1 skin for Modern Sonic and base Sonic Generations. He is my son, and he is perfect. And if you signed up for the newsletter in time, you got the Sonic Jam skin for Classic Sonic. Look at him with his popsicle hands. It's honestly hard for me to think of any major problems this game has. I haven't really run into any sort of glitches of any kind, and there hasn't been any graphical glitches of any kind that I've seen. If I had to complain about something, I wish there was an easier way to track some of the collectibles, and I wish we could move the map around on the pause screen. And I do think that Shadow Generations could have been like an hour-ish longer maybe, but considering the game is just as replayable as Sonic Generations, it's not as big of a problem. Shadow Generations is a perfect evolution of what's been established in Sonic Frontiers and may very well be the best that the boost formula has ever been. With great levels, beautiful graphics, and an amazing soundtrack, I think I can confidently say that Shadow Generations ties with Sonic Generations as my favorite Sonic game. I would love for Sonic Team to follow the same design philosophy as this game with fresh level aesthetics and an even bigger open zone. If you're any sort of fan of Sonic the Hedgehog, please pick up Sonic X Shadow Generations. You are getting two great platformers for the price of one. Now, who could get the spotlight like this in the future?
I'm out. I call dibs!